Hello, everyone. Welcome virtually to the UC Botanical Garden at Berkeley and our special Earth Day presentation today. I'm Christine Manu. I'm Education Director and Visitor Engagement Director here at the UC Botanical Garden. And I am thrilled to host a friend from across the border today for a very special presentation about his work. I wanted to let you know that we're going to keep everybody on mute today, but we do encourage you to be part of the conversation. By using your chat box, you can field questions that I will then extend to Paul at the end of the presentation, or if it's related to something he's speaking about that you're hoping for clarification, I might interrupt him and ask it during the presentation. But we have a lot to experience today. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to a dear friend of the garden, Shirley Watts. Shirley is the founder of Natural Discourse. And what Natural Discourse is a series of symposia, publications, site-specific art installations that explore the connection between art, science, and the humanities within the framework of botanical gardens, like here at the garden, and natural history museums and field stations. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Shirley, to introduce our very special guest.
Yeah, thanks, Christine. Thanks for that introduction. And thanks to you and Anthony Garza here at the garden that have helped make this happen. Natural Discourse actually started at the UC Berkeley Botanical Garden in 2012 with an exhibit in the garden. And I'm thrilled to be back here collaborating with you guys. It kind of feels like coming home. So this is really wonderful for me. It's my absolute pleasure to introduce Paul Walde. I'm not going to read his bio, but I will tell you that if you're interested in more information about his work, he has a wonderful website, which I've been going through. It includes video clips of the work and sound and all kinds of information about him. He keeps it very up to date. So I'd encourage you to take a look at that. Paul was born in the UK and immigrated to Canada, I think, as a child. He now lives in Victoria, British Columbia, and he teaches at the University of Victoria. He's been a working artist for over 25 years, which is not a small thing. Much admiration for that. His work encompasses music, video, performance, dance to address environmental issues. He'll be working with us in fall of 2026 on an upcoming event based at the UC Berkeley Richmond Field Station, the Wood Products Lab and Wood Library there. So keep your eyes open for that. You can sign up for a mailing list through the website naturaldiscourse.org to be informed about that. The one thing that I really love about Paul's work is that he takes it out there, as you will see. He's done dance performances on the ice in Alaska, live performances in natural history museums, and his latest work is Forestorium, which is a full-length opera that was performed with chorus, soloist, orchestra in the forests in British Columbia last summer. So please welcome Paul Walde.
Thank you, Shirley, and thank you, Christine. Yeah, it's great to be here. I'm trying to see if I can get this to work. There we go. Today I will be talking about Forestorium, which is my opera, as well as Treescape Revolution #1, which is the work that Shirley will be presenting as part of one of the Natural Discourse exhibitions in the fall, which I'm really looking forward to. And but first, I thought I would give a little background about me, and I also want to show where some of these ideas come from. As Shirley mentioned, I've been working as an artist for 25 years, well over 25 years now, and I didn't start out with the idea that I would write an opera or anything like that. So I started out as a visual artist who had a music practice and really kept those things separate. And so my background is my training as a visual artist. I worked as a painter, trained as a painter, and that all those things inform my practice today, which is much more multidisciplinary. So I will share some images and talk a little bit about some of these ideas by going back in time to when I was a student, because some of these ideas start as very, I guess, kind of humble ideas, and I've allowed my practice to take me on this journey, and the journey is something that I couldn't have anticipated when I started. So let's see, why is this not forwarding? There we go. Okay, so this is an installation I did as a student at NYU. I did my master's in New York, and that's really when I started focusing on the environment, precisely because of a lack of access to it. I grew up in Northern Ontario, which, while there was nature all around, there was also a heavy industry, and that experience really informed my practice as well. So these are photographs, family photographs from my dad, actually. He grew up in India, in Calcutta, and so sharing these family photos, they're out of focus and reprinted, and they're scattered amongst these leaves, which, to get leaves in New York City, I had to take the subway up to Central Park and gather these leaves with gloves on so I didn't get stabbed by needles or something. And I'm having a little bit of trouble advancing. There we go. And these were displayed with these large paintings, and the paintings were photographs that were taken from the New York Times and then greatly enlarged and hand painted onto these panels. And so this is the first time when I really start thinking about media images and representation, and starting to have some kind of environmental themes in the work. And I was also doing these large scale woodcuts at the time. So this was another image from the New York Times. This one was in an article about overpopulation of deer on Long Island. And so I found that pretty interesting, and then made this giant woodcut, which is 8 feet by 5 feet, and took this border from one of Albert Durer's woodcuts and reframed this deer. And so I really like this process with both of these works, but they took a long time to do. And so I found myself as a printmaker really focusing on making these plates. Most of my practice was making the plates and not so much making the prints. And my parents bought a property, a holiday property in Northern Ontario, so quite close to where we grew up. And around that time, so I was visiting them, and while I was visiting them, this place had no running water at the time, no electricity. And I was sitting in the outhouse one morning and noticed these marks on the wall of the outhouse, and it was where a porcupine had chewed into the plywood. And that reminded me of the kind of marks that I was making as a printmaker into these woodcuts. And I wondered if it would be possible to print these marks. And so I spent a couple of years researching paper and figuring out how to make these woodcuts. But this is the first time where I start interacting directly with nature and start trying to imagine, is there a cultural relevance to what these critters are doing, and can I bring what they're doing into a cultural form somehow by printing these things? And so these are quite modest works. Eventually I start dragging large sheets of plywood into the woods and letting the porcupines do their thing on those large pieces of wood. But that led to this work, which is in Toronto. I had a solo exhibition, and I decided to bring the outhouse into the gallery and treat the outhouse as a mini gallery, much like Marcel Duchamp's Boîte and Valise, where he has this little retrospective that's in a suitcase. I decided to treat the outhouse that way. and then brought in beaver nodwood and created wallpaper out of this. But there's also an architectural frieze, and that's in the next picture. So there's the outhouse, and I turned it into a little gallery. So it's drywalled, and there's track lighting in a little gallery bench and a mini retrospective. But this piece of plaster, so this is a plaster cast of a beaver nod tree that was taken down in front of one of the little cabins that I was using as a studio at the time on this property. And when I cast it, I thought I was going to turn it into a painting. So I brought it into the studio, full intent to somehow mount it onto a panel and paint on it, because my practice was primarily printmaking and painting at that point. But when I brought it inside, it reminded me of music notation. And I wondered if it was possible to translate it into music notation. And so that's what I did. I did this process of working it out on paper. And I asked one of my students at the time if it was possible to use a computer to do music notation, and if I was able to input the notes into the software, would I be able to hear it? And he said, yeah, of course, you can do that. But I didn't know. And up until this point, I'd really kept my music practice and my art practice separately. While I lived in New York, I worked at a gallery, and the gallery director said to me, for God's sakes, don't tell anyone that you do music. They won't take you seriously as an artist. By this point, though, I was back living in Northern Ontario, and I figured that no one was looking at me anyway, and no one was taking me seriously, so it didn't matter. So I just started following these ideas to see what would happen. And so this is how I translated these notes and ended up scoring this piece for a string quartet. And so this is the first time that I bring sound into the gallery, and it's the first time that I score something for traditional musical instruments as well. So I'd studied piano as a kid, but most of the work I'd been doing was playing in rock bands at that point. Let's see if this is it. Nope. Trying to move to the next one. That's what it sounds like. I'm kind of stuck there, so having a bit of trouble with the keynote advancing. So I ended up inviting people to do remixes, and so these are some of the local musicians in Toronto that came to do that work, and I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed working with musicians. I enjoyed the performance side of things, and so this became very influential in what came next. And at that point, I'd been showing paintings, having painting shows. So this was one of the first installations. It was the first time I brought performers in. It was the first time I had a multidisciplinary presentation. And I found it really rewarding. However, there wasn't a lot of feedback on the show. People didn't seem to care about it a whole lot. And this work kind of went dark. I continued working with sound over the next decade, but it wasn't until 2010 I got invited to remount this show in Vancouver, and because of that, sorry, still trying to get past all these things. That led to an invitation to do a work in the BC interior. So at this point, I'm still living in Ontario, and hadn't moved to BC yet, hadn't got the job at the University of Victoria. But I got an invitation from a curator in British Columbia to do a project. And her original invitation was to represent Northern Symphony, which was the installation I just showed. And I just moved it across the country and just moved it back to Ontario. And I said, I think it's hard to move and difficult to mount. And I knew this was a small gallery and they didn't have a big budget. So I said, why don't we make a new work? And so we ended up collaboratively coming up with this idea of creating this piece which was called Requiem for a Glacier, which ended up becoming my best known work. So this was done in 2013, but we started working on it. My invitation came in 2011. So I spent 2 years developing this work. And what it entailed was a 4-part oratorio presented live on the on a glacier in the Jumbo Valley in the BC interior. And so this is the first time that I start working with orchestras and working with the choir, and also working with large groups of people in a way. So though I found it very inspiring to work with the folks on Northern Symphony, this kind of took to another level. So everybody that you see in this image was a volunteer. These are environmental activists and students, and they all volunteered to take part in this piece. And so, yeah, we performed this live. And this was an area that was under threat from resort development. So there was the plan to build a ski resort there. The ski resort development plan was based on the fact that when it's too warm to ski in Aspen, Colorado, they could sell condos in the BC interior. And the BC is British Columbia, by the way. The BC government basically wanted the taxpayers to pay for all the infrastructure to go in for this. And they appointed a mayor and council who were all resort developers to oversee the stewardship of this. And it just so happened that this land was a sacred space to the Tanaka people. And for them, it's the place where the grizzly bear spirit comes to dance. And so there was a lot of opposition to this development. And so we went there, collaborated with some of these environmental groups to present this work at this location. And one of the things I didn't expect, so this is the whole cast and crew, so there's about 100 people we had to bring up there to do this with the film crew, the orchestra, and all the people to help carry all the equipment and drive people. We had people drive. This is a very remote location, so it's 4 hours on difficult logging roads from the nearest town and up the side of a mountain. So, but one of the things I didn't expect when I did this was that people would, that the people who participated in this would find this very rewarding. And a lot of them described this as one of the most important days of their lives. And as an artist, that wasn't something that I'd ever experienced before. And I thought, this is something that I want to continue in my work. And then this took the form of video installation. So that's how these works get out into the world. They become video installations. And this work continues to be shown in different parts of the world. It'll be shown in Zurich in a couple of weeks as part of an exhibition about glaciers during Zurich Art Week. So this work, even though it's been, it was done in 2013, 13 years later, it's still being exhibited. And so working in this way, it's really how my practice has become structured. And it's these kind of experiences that I find really valuable. And so, and the other thing I want to share is that the BC government ended up canceling that project in 2020. And so the activist community, they pointed to Requiem for a Glacier as one of the contributing factors in bringing this fight to a larger audience internationally. And they felt that it contributed to the BC government ending up backing off on this development plan. And they returned the land to the Tanaka people as an indigenous stewardship conservancy. So this form of artivism, the idea of combining art and activism in a way, was something that was new to me as well, and something that I want to lean into in future works. And so that leads me to Forestorium. So this is kind of what's led me to this place in terms of creating an opera for the old growth. I'm always trying to do things I haven't done before. So creating a string quartet was something I hadn't done before. Creating an oratorio was something I hadn't done before. And then this idea of creating an opera. And each time I do one of these things, I get them way in over my head. I'm doing things that I have no business doing. But I always find it really rewarding, and it's how I learn how to do things and how to stretch my capacity as an artist. So after doing Requiem for a Glacier, I decided I wanted to start working on Forestorium. So almost immediately I had this idea of doing an opera about the old growth, and this idea of creating an opera was something that seemed like an evolution from creating an oratorio, which is basically an oratorio is like an opera, but it's undramatized. So it's more like a concert. But it just so happened that around this time I got invited to join this group called ʷəŋən Tree of Life. And it Chief Randy Cook is the guy with the backwards baseball cap there. He's a hereditary chief of the Mamtagila people, which is one of the Kwakwaka'wakw nations on northern Vancouver Island. He invited artists and scientists to come together to work on his land and bring attention to the plight of the forests in his territories. So this was the first trip that we did together, small group. And so there's Randy, there's also Dr. Suzanne Simard. So Suzanne Simard's the one in the middle. She's a forest researcher. She did a famous book now called Finding the Mother Tree, and her new book just came out last week. And there's a movie being made about Suzanne. And besides Suzanne, in the green is Rachel Holt, who's one of the scientists who she's a policy analyst for the government. She runs an independent consulting service that provides information to the government to try to help them do better at forest management. And then on the far right is Teresa Ryan, who is an indigenous researcher who works with Suzanne on salmon forests. So it's how the salmon are integrated into forests. So these folks helped influence and inform my process in creating this work. And so we've been working together now for over 5 years. And Randy has ended up creating this large foundation now. And the Tree of Life gathering last year had over 200 people attend. So this has mushroomed into this large advocacy group, and that focuses on arts, science, and also conservancy as well. So this is it's grown quite a bit now, but it started with these humble beginnings. At the same time that invitation happened, the protests at Fairy Creek were happening, and Fairy Creek is one of the last remaining old growth stands that's on Pachidat territory. So it's at the south end of Vancouver Island. And this ended up becoming the largest act of civil disobedience in Canadian history. So, and this got picked up all over the world. So The Guardian was reporting on this. And all this was taking place while at the beginning stages of me working on this work. And so during the Tree of Life, we started doing research on the forest, finding remaining stands that we could go to. And Mark Worthing, who is pictured in the earlier photo of the group, he, in our second year out, he identified 9 forests that were earmarked for deferral by the British Columbia government. And because they're earmarked for deferral, he decided to take us to these locations to see intact old growth forests, and with Suzanne and her team. So she was bringing the Mother Tree team, which is her group of researchers, to study these forests. And some of her students had never been to an old growth forest. And 8 of the 9 sites that Mark had earmarked were logged before we got there. So, so a lot of environmental grief that that goes into the work we're doing. And we kind of arrived here and they were doing the log sort, and many of these trees were between 1,000 and 1,500 years old. So these are much older than the government reports they are. And these are forests that are really irreplaceable. I think something that's 1,000 years old is not a renewable resource. So one of the things I wanted to share with my audiences was the rate of deforestation. So this is a metronome that has a picture of Lonely Doug, which was one of the remaining trees on Pachidat territory. So all around this tree, it's a very famous tree. The loggers left this one tree and everything around it got clear cut. And it's one of the largest Douglas fir trees in the world. So Lonely Doug is on this metronome, and the metronome's set to the rate of deforestation in British Columbia. And this will be the opening image in the opera when it comes to the theater. And the rate of deforestation is 120 trees a minute. So that's about this fast. And if you imagine a tree falling every time you hear a click, it's quite remarkable and unnerving. So even just this metronome, I've exhibited this on its own as well several times. And I started building a body of work to support the work around the opera. So that brings me to Treescape Revolution. So one of the things that is very difficult to show people is how big these trees actually are. And so this is a large photographic work that shows the circumference of one of the old growth trees that is in Eden Grove, which is on Pachidat territory. And the Pachidat are one of the Nishalnath nations on the west side of Vancouver Island. So the Kwakwaka'wakw are on the northeast side, and the Pachidat are on the sort of south and lower end of the west side of Vancouver Island. And so this is in Eden Grove, which is a grove that is not protected. So this could get logged still. And this photograph is 6 feet tall and 36 feet long. And so that's the work that Shirley is going to present to your audiences down there in California very, very soon. So stay tuned with Natural Discourse to learn more about that when it happens. And it's basically I took over 200 photographs with a very high resolution camera and then stitched these images together. And I developed this technique for work that I created called Glacial, which is the follow-up work to Requiem for a Glacier, where I took over 400 photos of a glacier and stitched together and then created this video path across the glacier and composited moving images within that. So this work works as a photograph. And so these are some of the details of the photograph. And that's what it looked like the first time it was installed. So actually on the ground in front is one of Randy Cook's work. And then if you look kind of below this, the metronome's on display as well. So this was a show that took place here in Victoria, which is where I live right now. And this is another installation of this work, just to give you a sense of scale. These people are standing quite closer to the camera. So the photograph is actually taller than the people. And then the following year, I went back and shot video of the life forms that were living on this tree. So this is one of the things that inspired me to do this work, to show that the tree itself it's not just a tree, that it itself it's an ecosystem. And so this is our rig that we created. It's a camera, a tripod mounted on a ladder. You had to climb up to get some of these shots. And what we did was shot video of some of the life forms that are living on or below the tree. So this is a salamander. There's these millipedes, this is cyanomillipede. Some of these large banana slugs as well. And these are all composited into the photograph, and then their camera path is made across this. So I'll just show you a short clip of this. So now everything, using the photograph as the basis, there's now video work that takes you on a tour of the tree. So that's a little bit about Treescape, and you can watch that whole video on my website. The soundtrack for that is a field recording that I did basically in front of that tree. So the woodpeckers and everything, and the frogs, they were all there the day that we took the photographs. So what this image here, this is a brief synopsis of Forestorium. And Forestorium is a 3-act opera with several scenes that take place. The first act is about the forest and the human dynamic around the forest. So dealing with Fairy Creek, dealing with the point of view of the loggers, the activist community, and some of the point of view of some of the ecologists. And so I'm not a writer. The way I came up with the libretto for this was to interview people, some of the people that are involved in this. I interviewed loggers, I interviewed some of the ecologists. So I interviewed Suzanne Simard and Rachel Holt and Teresa Ryan, as well as Helen Davis, who's one of the ecologist who does research on bear dens on the island. I interviewed Indigenous knowledge keepers, including Randy Cook, and then also worked with texts that were existing around this. So the BC government's announcement of the deferral of old growth forests. So they made an announcement at the height of the Fairy Creek protest to kind of quell the protest, to say that we're going to defer logging in the old growth areas while we sort out the best way forward. And of course, it didn't do anything. All it did was speed up the rate of logging, because the loggers believed that a moratorium was coming, and so they went and logged in the deferral areas anyway. So the first act deals with all these different things, as well as a scene where Elder Bill Jones confronts the police, and that was based on a real event that happened, and I'll show you a picture of that in a moment. This is the site that I found to stage the opera. So it took a long time to find an old growth forest that was reasonably accessible. I wanted to find a site that was on Monptagila territory, which is Randy's homeland, and this is on the land of the Hamotan clan, which is actually Randy's family's clan. So just by chance we ended up finding this location. I'd spent almost 2 years. And the reason it took so long to find an old growth forest or even a fragment of an old growth forest, is that most of the forests on Vancouver Island have already been logged. There are less than 3% left of the old growth forests in British Columbia. So it's not easy to find these things. And the ones that are remaining are being logged at an alarming rate. We point to the logging in the Amazon as being problematic, but the BC government is allowing logging at a greater rate than is happening in the Amazon right now. And these are some of the most biodiverse ecosystems in the planet. and they are thousands of years old. They took over 3,000 years for these ecosystems to develop, and they are also some of the best carbon storage sequestering ecosystems in the world as well. So we're losing a lot by losing these ecosystems. But this is the location, and so we spent some time at this location creating areas where people could walk, trying to create passageways where we wouldn't impact endangered plants or sacred plants. So there's many plants that are sacred to the ʷəŋən as well. And so we worked with community and with biologists to identify those plants to make sure that we weren't doing harm to these areas. And the pathways that we took are game trails. So these trails that we used were existing there. There were bear and elk and other animals already walk, and so all we did was clear the game trails and use those so that we weren't creating new disruptions to this environment. And then, of course, I had to score something for an orchestra and chorus, and then write a libretto that went with it. So adapting all these texts that all these interviews. So I had, I think, over 40 hours of interviews and transcribing those, and then compiling them and finding the moments that coalesced into some sort of narrative, and then mapping this onto this score. And then there's a lot of natural sounds that I asked the orchestra to play as well. So there's bird calls, as well as the sound of industry. So the sound of chainsaws and some of the industrial equipment that's used in logging. And this is the performance that took place. So last July, we performed the first two acts. As I said, the first act is about the human dynamic around the forest. The second act is those same characters reflecting on what a forest is. And then the last act, which is the third act, which I'm writing right now, is the forest speaking back to the audience and trying to tell people that they are in fact part of the forest. So I'm going to show some of the images from that performance. And here's a short clip. Just going to move to another clip if I can. Let's see if that works. Yeah, so in that clip, that's some of the ecologists talking about the difference between old growth forest and second growth. So they're talking about tree plantations, which is what gets planted, and they're saying that there's no woodpeckers in Finland because Finland is forest management system is one of the things that British Columbia based their forest management system on, and they're saying there's no woodpeckers in Finland because there's no dead trees, and so you need dead trees to have this kind of biodiversity. And so there's a lot of messages like that in this work. And the nice thing about working on something like an opera or something of this scale is that you have a chance to explore a lot of different ideas in a lot of detail. So there's a logger. I think I saw Peter on the call, so that's Peter there doing the being the logger. So we have all these different points of views, and as I said, some of the things that I showed in the opera are based on real events. So this is Elder Bill Jones, who's a Pachidat elder who's very involved in the activist community in trying to preserve old growth forests, which he believes are sacred. As people believe are sacred, and trying to stop this logging that's taking place. And so Fairy Creek was taking place on Pachidat land, and there was a police blockade, excuse me, that prevented people from getting into these territories, and they were preventing him from going up to his land. And during the standoff, this got recorded, and actually to his right is Rainbow Eyes, who's also one of the activists who I interviewed for the opera. And yeah, so there's the next scene I'm going to show briefly is of this, basically a dramatization of this standoff. So there's this is how it looked in the opera, and I think this is the.
When you speak, you have witnesses. When you do act, you have witnesses. These are the witnesses of your denial, of the Crown's denial of our rights to be free in our own land with all our people. It is a shame that you are serving a crown that has crushed so many millions and millions of people, as is witnessed up in Kamloops right now, that your shame will go with you. As you know that their deaths are an exact consequence of your pillaging and dominating this land to reap the benefit. And you want us to submit to your etiquette when we know we have customs of welcoming our guests? That is an affront to our chief. And you must go with the shame of the death of all our First Nations children in your schools. I am now angry. I am hurt. I am humiliated, as I have been all of my life, by the dominance of a colonial system that has taught me to be ashamed of myself, when in fact I know that you are serving a crown that has no shame.
Okay, I think I'll leave it there and answer questions that anyone has. Leave it with the words of Bill Jones. So that's actually Bill Jones actually said that to the police in a completely unrehearsed, unprepared speech when they wouldn't let him access his territory during this blockade that they had set up to prevent people and activists from entering the forest. And he was trying to bring guests there. What he's saying is, we have a custom of sharing. So he wanted, and the custom of sharing is that you bring witnesses to observe ceremony as part of an oral tradition. And the police weren't allowing him to do that. And so he, just off the cuff, delivered that speech, which is one of the most profound things I've ever heard. And so working with Bill, he allowed me to bring this to different publics through dramatizing this as part of this opera. And actually, Bill himself hadn't heard his own words, so I made a transcription and then went to his place and read it to him. And he said, well, wow, that sounds pretty good. So he was impressed with himself when he heard it. So and Bill was there at the opera. So I think I'll forward through some of the other photos of the performance. Yeah, there's Bill with Chichumi, who's played Bill in the opera. So, yeah, happy to answer any questions.
Oh my goodness, Paul, thank you so much. I'm going to bring back Shirley to join here too. You are getting, of course, so much appreciation. That was astounding, so profound. We do have a few minutes. If any of you have questions for Paul, you can go ahead and put them in the chat box, and I will relay them to him. But Shirley, did you have anything you wanted to start with?
Oh, I'm just blown away. This is just such incredible work, and thank you for your activism and for sharing with us. These videos of the performance just bring tears to my eyes.
Thank you.
Yay, Paul.
Yeah. and that's live. That's live audio too. So it's not clean audio. It's not.
That would be my
studio.
question.
Yeah.
How did you do this in the woods?
Well, it was very difficult, and just getting that many people out there was extraordinary. And I've done other work which I didn't talk about. I ran a festival for a while, and so got used to working with large groups of people. And I was also the chair of my department, so administrative skills are part of my practice as well. And so, logistics is something that each time I learned a little bit more, and definitely doing Requiem for Glacier prepared me for what might be involved in getting hundreds of people out to an old growth site, and getting the okay from my university's insurance, and all that was part of it too. So yeah, it's just recruiting the musicians as well, and all of that stuff is a lot of work. So and then bringing the film crew and everybody else. And when you're doing these things, you have to think of everything. What are people going to eat? Where are they going to go to the bathroom? All those things, and leaving no trace. So going back and restoring the site afterwards as well as part of the work.
Amazing. I have a funny technical question of I didn't see any microphones. How did you mic it?
They're there. They're just out of range of the cameras. They're like
So,
more or less beside the cameras, which is why it sounds like everything's at a bit of a distance as well.
okay. Okay. You're just getting in the chat so many wonderful appreciations of
Okay,
how
I
touching and moving it is and all the
maybe
attention
I'll.
to detail that you gave it.
I don't know if this is possible, but I see Peter participating and I wonder if he has any comment on is it possible if he has a comment to let him speak to us about what it was like to be part of that performance? The singers were also mic'd.
Yeah.
Okay.
Who who am I unmiking? Peter?
It's Peter
Peter,
slash,
Erica.
yeah, Peter, Erica, yeah.
Okay. I invited them to.
Yeah, there he is.
Erica is my partner, who was also on the scene, interviewing Suzanne Simard and other participants during this event. Wow, I wasn't expecting to say anything. It was an incredible experience. I was playing the logger, so I walked onto the scene with a chainsaw, um, and
And
of course,
pretend to cut down one of the big trees.
yeah,
Yeah.
right. And actually, it was it was quite profound to embody that. Paul's libretto is powerful in that it captures the kind of full range of the experience and the perspective of the logger as someone who loves their work, but who's also very close to the land and is seeing it changing and worries about the future of the industry and whether their son will be able to follow in their footsteps because, frankly, the trees are running out. Um, it was very powerful and it's wonderful to see a little bit more of it. I miss it. I had this incredibly intense connection to this piece, and then it has sort of disappeared. I can't go and play it again, so I can't wait to see more.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Peter. And Peter's not a professional opera singer, by the way. He's an environmental journalist who does amazing work. And so Peter Fairley, check out his writing. It's incredibly powerful. And so is Erica G's work as well. So yeah.
Thanks, Paul.
Paul, will you remind me the term you use is artivist? Is that right?
Artivist,
I
that
love
artivism,
that.
that coming together.
Good.
Because I think artists have we can do things differently. So I think traditional activism is very oppositional, and because of that, it can be very divisive. You're either for something or against something, and I think art gives the opportunity for folks to have experiences and receive information in an experiential way. And these longer time-based works that I'm doing, I'm trying to give people time to think as well, so they can have their own thoughts I'm also a teacher, and one of the things I've learned as a teacher is you can't tell anybody anything. The students have to believe it's their own ideas, and I think that's the same with the public as well. So I think there's a role for artists and cultural creators within this discourse to help shift the needle and raise awareness about things in a different way that isn't as confrontational. And I also feel a responsibility as a cultural maker to create the culture that I want to live in. And a lot of the problems that we have in the world right now are culturally based. So whether it's late capitalism or a lot of our politics, that's happening right now that is destructive, those are cultural values. And so if we don't like the cultural values, we need to shift those cultural values, and we need to create the culture that we want to see. And that includes our relationship with Indigenous people as well. And for those who don't know, I believe it's over 80% of the biodiversity on the planet is held in Indigenous steward lands, which is less than 10% of what's remaining. So these are incredibly important places because of Indigenous stewardship. So understanding those cultures and how they can live not in a destructive way, I find that incredibly inspiring in thinking about how we might want to live, us non-Indigenous people might want to live on the land.
So beautiful. Thank you so much. We are wrapping up the end of our time here together. For those of you who might have joined a little bit later, this presentation has been recorded, and we'll send it out to all of our registered participants, as well as put it on the Garden's YouTube channel. It does take a little bit of time for us to process the recording, so we'll let you know just as soon as it's ready. Paul, thank you so much for the work that you do and your generosity with this presentation today and spending time with us. We look forward to seeing more of the things that you are up to and creating that culture we all want to live in. So thank you. Thank you all for joining us, and we hope to see you at the UC Botanical Garden.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.